Hey, how's it going, guys? This is your boy Haze, and today in 8.1 we're going to be doing an update to Unholy DK's Azerite traits, PvP talents, and talents, so you guys can go ahead and maximize that Live Lord status on your Unholy DK inside of Arena 1v1 or Battleground situations. So let's go ahead and jump into this video and do this. No bugs at all here in 8.1 Blizzard. I don't see any problems at all.
It's who we are, it's what we do, we've come so far. And now we pay the price, so don't even cry. The world is breaking down, and I cannot leave the ground.
So let's go ahead and start talking about Unholy DK talents in 8.1. Now for the ads for level 56, we're going to be using Infected Claws, and the reason why I like using it is because the majority of the time I like to be in melee range on Unholy DK at the moment because of the improved death strikes. Now, as for Infected Claws, it's going to add a 30% chance for our little ghoul over here to actually grant us extra necrotic strikes on the target to essentially decrease the amount of healing they get, and us completely relying there on our mechanic stability. Now, the reason why is because they buffed Necrotic Strike up. It used to deal 16% of weapon damage up to 30%, and of course it deals 8% of someone's health in absorptions. Now, the reason they did that is because later on when we get to like 415 item level, basically 8% is going to be a lot more than the standard was in the previous patch. Health pools are going to get a lot higher, and we're going to need more absorption to keep up with those large amount of health pool. And overall, we definitely gained from that interaction and changing over, and our necrotic strikes are a lot stronger than they used to be. As for the talent Will to Serve, it got nerfed. Yeah, they kind of just decided to nerf the crud out of that one there. Not really sure why. It didn't feel like it did an insane amount of damage, but I guess so. As for Clawing Shadows, very great to use on mages if you're trying to put in pressure on a mage, or if you're trying to duel a mage, something like this could definitely help you out. But the majority of the time, if you're relying on a Necrotic Strike spec, you're going to want to be in melee range and not using a range Clawing Shadows to begin with. As for level 57 talents, they did buff up Bursting Swords a bit, so it affects all the targets around you, but for single target and let's say 2s and 3s when there's not necessarily 10 people around, Bursting Swords isn't going to be that great. And the majority of the time there's going to be a lot of range involved too, so that again is going to make that talent a little bit worse. That's why Ebon Fever is going to be the one we're going to go with there. And as for Unholy Blight, obviously we ignored it before, we'll most likely ignore it now. As for the level 58 talents, Grip of the Dead, if you're not blood, don't be touching this talent. As for Death's Reach, it's ignorable, so it just increases the range on your death grip. I mean, honestly, there's very few situations that things should be outranging your death grip. Like, the majority of the time, I mean, if you could use it, let's say, Druid or a Mage Blink, they get outside your range and you can't hit them with death grip, that could help. Or, I mean, against a Hunter 1v1, a Hunter that's really good about hitting just outside that dead zone, that could actually make a difference. But, I mean, I can't see it making more of a difference than Asphyxiate in arena or in 1v1 situations. I mean, obviously that's going to be like the go-to talent there. As for level 60 talents, we're going to be using Soul Reaper since it's going to apply a dot over 8 seconds and deal quite a bit of damage. It's not necessarily the greatest talent, but if you can get a kill with it, obviously 10% haste is really strong. As for Harbinger of Doom, Death Coils really aren't something we use too often at the moment, and I mean, even the procs are really underwhelming. It's a free attack, I mean, really great as a filler, but overall not necessarily the greatest, since Death Strike and Death Coil literally do about the same damage, but Death Strike obviously is cheaper, and it's going to grant you survivability. As for Pestilent Pustules, it's okay in PvE situations. PvP not that great. Nah, I don't necessarily like using it unless I'm running Bursting Swords build, and right now Ebon Fever is definitely stronger than that is. As for the level 75 talent, Spell Eater would be good in, let's say, dueling caster comps, or you're going up against like Mage Boomy and you really need the survivability, and Death Pack is just not cutting it, and it's really putting you in a bad situation the majority of the time. With the amount of CC coming out, you could definitely use it. Besides that, really wouldn't touch it. And as for Wraithwalk, you just don't touch Wraithwalk. Like, it's just not worth taking over either of the other two abilities. As for the level 90 talents, Pestilence is going to be the way to go majority of the time because it has a chance to apply festering wounds on the target when you drop death and decay. Normally not necessarily something we'd use too often inside of arena unless we're trying to break out a stealthy or something, but now this ability can be combined with the new necrotic strike that's buffed up to AoE 3 different targets with necrotic strike, which is fairly strong. Now, inside of like rated battleground situations, you could also use Raise Abomination, which applies Festering Wound to all the targets, and basically you could drop D&D in that at the same time. You know, apply the wounds to the target, hopefully you get a little bit of Pestilence, and you're able to multi-cleave a lot of targets. Now, it's going to be very situational, obviously, and if there's a lot of range on the other team, it's probably not going to work out too well. So you got to be kind of weary about that. As for Defile, I mean, it's not that great. Doesn't do that much damage in single target anymore, so really just going to kind of ignore that. Epidemic is pretty good for like Temple of Kamogu, but it can be good at padding the meters, but not necessarily the greatest overall. As for level 100 talents, Army of the Damned is pretty much damned. It's useless. Summon Gargoyle, we just kind of ignore that talent for the majority of this expansion because Unholy Frenzy is so strong. It applies festering wounds to the target. Everyone just DC'd on my friends list. Everyone just crashed all at once. That's kind of crazy. Nothing like some more crazy stuff going on in 8.1. But Unholy Frenzy is extremely powerful and also grants 20% haste, which haste, again, is Unholy DK's main stat. So definitely going to be the way to go when it comes to burst. As for PvP talents, Transfusion is an amazing ability that we got, which generates 20 runic power and reduces the runic power cost by 50% for 7 seconds, giving you enough time to get 5 to 6 death strikes off. I believe Frost DKs can pop Empowered before popping Transfusion, and they're able to get off 6. I don't know if Unholy DK is capable of it since it has to generate a little bit extra runic power. Maybe if they're lucky. Maybe. But yeah, Transfusion is definitely a way to go for survivability when it comes to 1v1 and or arena. Very good since it's on a 45-second cooldown. And also you can take this ability, macro it into a /cast sequence, macro reset equals 45. Transfusion, and then comma death strike, comma death strike, comma death strike. And basically this ability will proc Transfusion and lay out a death strike at the exact same time, since it does not reside on the same global cooldown as other abilities, maximizing and of course giving you fast healing, because a lot of classes are going to try to CC you when you throw up Transfusion if they're smart enough to do so. Of course, Necrotic Strike, because the buffs made this ability absolutely amazing. Life and Death. Now, this is something that is pretty good ability now. Of course, it comes with the Virulent Plague. Whenever it's erupted or dispelled, it deals 400% normal damage, which is something we, of course, used before. Very strong for BGs in those situations. There are a few other talents, obviously, that are very strong, like Dark Sim inside of Arena is going to be very effective, since it does not cost any runic power again, and it's on a 20-second cooldown. Anything that has slow CC, Mage, Druid, Cyclone, things like that are going to be great to steal. And of course, if you can steal Paladin Bubble, that doesn't hurt either, because I mean that can really relieve a lot of pressure off your healer. As for other abilities, Defensive, Anti-Magic Zone is fairly good, but if you got to choose between Transfusion and Anti-Magic Zone, I'd probably take Transfusion, just because this is a 2-minute cooldown and Transfusion is on a 45-second cooldown. A lot more helpful. As for other abilities, Necrotic Aura is going to be fairly good. It deals 8% damage, still good for increasing our single target burst if that's what you're lacking. Let's say you're doing 2s and you're trying to kill a healer as fast as possible, that's going to increase your damage. And Decomposing Aura, and let's say 3s, is going to be very effective to reduce the amount of stamina, and of course the higher amount of health pools we get, the more effective Decomposing Aura is going to be inside of Arena. As for Necromancer's Bargain, this was really the greatest disappointment that kind of came to in this patch, and that was simply because the Crypt Fever doesn't do that much damage, and of course we didn't necessarily read between the lines very well. Healing spells cast. That means they need to be cast, which when I think of something being cast, I think of instacast. For some reason didn't apply to instacast. When I think of cast, I just think of it going off essentially. But it turns out there actually has to be a cast bar. for this to actually affect and refresh on the target, which I absolutely hate. But also putting Necromancer, or putting your Apocalypse on a 45-second cooldown is not a bad thing to do, but it doesn't necessarily hit very hard when you actually have multiple stacks of Festering Might. That hits quite a bit harder than Apocalypse. So, I mean, it will add a little bit of filler to your rotation, but overall, it's not very exciting to me to use. It is kind of cool, but it's not that exciting. Of course, we talked about Raise Abomination here when it comes to Battlegrounds and AoE situation, and of course, we got Lichborn. I can see this ability being used in certain situations and helping, but the 1 minute cooldown's nice, but Transfusion, I would use that. I use Transfusion over Lichborn any day. And if you watched the PvP video I posted yesterday, that was from the PTR, rocking Lichborn, people just ran away from me every single time. Just every single time. Every single time. They just kind of ran away. I mean, and they had enough survivability and healing to heal themselves up, or at least get off my stacks of Necrotic, and Lichborn just was not great. Like, anytime someone's seen it, they literally just walked away. And I knew that was going to be the problem with this ability when I seen how bad the snare was going to be. So starting off with the rotation, we're going to talk about, let's say, quick bursting on a target, a warrior, something along those lines. Then after that, we'll discuss a little bit more arena / healer killing rotation. So one of the tricks to dueling, and it's fairly strong to do to certain classes like an elemental shaman and warriors essentially, is so when the duel starts, you have 3-second countdown. So at 2 seconds, you're going to pop Dark Transformation. At 1 second, you're going to pop Unholy Frenzy. That way, so when the duel starts, you literally hit Outbreak. You have your 2 cooldowns started, and then you drop 2 Festering Strikes, hit Soul Reaper, and drop Apocalypse, and then start spamming Necrotic Strike. And this will create a quick burst on the target that's going to generate a lot of pressure and force them to play defensive right off the bat, and it's going to give you the upper hand mechanically. And with the self-survivability of Death Knights or Unholy Death Knights, we're not going to have to necessarily kite as much burst as we used to. So I'll go ahead and show you exactly what's going on with that right here. I'll show you what it's like. Countdown, it comes down to 2. We pop that. We pop that. We're going to go ahead and lay out our dots. We're going to throw out 2 of those just so we can drop Apocalypse. We should have dropped Soul Reaper in front of that. Whatever, it doesn't matter. We'll just drop them the other way, and we're going to start dropping Necrotic Strike. And around here is when you're going to drop your first Death Strike and just kind of start self-survivability on the target while still keeping up your Necrotic Strike. You do not want your Necrotic Strikes to fall off. And of course, the simple fact of your Death Coils not necessarily hitting as hard, you're going to rely, of course, again, on your Death Strikes quite a bit more when it comes to 1v1, of course. So never let those fall off, and of course, never let your dots fall off. Always keep your dots up. You never want your dots to fall off on the target, ever, as Unholy. And if you do, put them back on as fast as possible. And that's it. I mean, it's fairly simple when it comes to DPS versus DPS. You're just simply relying on your consistent mechanic and dealing damage to the target. Now, when you're going into, let's say, arena scenarios, and your real plan is to dump DPS into a target to try to get a kill through a healer, it's literally the same thing as I previously did. You're just going to change it up just slightly enough that you want to watch for procs. Now, obviously, DPS on a target, you're going to do the same thing. I mean, it's really about applying your Festering Wounds and then dumping your Necrotic Strikes on a target. Like, that inevitably sums up the entire spec very simply. And the moment that you really want to burst on a target, you've got Necrotic Strikes built up. He's hitting, let's say, 70% of Necrotic Strikes, just something huge that you're going to be able to dump on the target and finish him off. And at that point, so we're going to go ahead and throw up your cooldowns. You're going to go ahead and use your abilities, make sure your dots are applied to the target, and continually dump Necrotic Strikes as fast as you can in the target to completely limit their healing as you're getting out all the maximum damage that you possibly can on a target. I mean, there really isn't a set rotation. I guess Unholy DKs is more, it's kind of like Frost DK, I guess you could say, where it has a priority system of things you want to use over one or the other and things you never want to fall off. So essentially, yeah, spam Festering if you don't have any Festering Wounds. Use Necrotic Strike if you do have Festering Wounds to limit healing. Don't let your Necrotic Strikes fall off. And then decide if you're not being focused, use Death Coils. If you are being focused, use Death Strikes. And And obviously, with the increased death strikes and, of course, transfusion, we've become a lot more tankier within this rotation to allow that mechanical strength of Unholy DKs to be a lot stronger than it previously was. So now we're going to kind of talk about how to stay alive 1v1 situations on the class now that they've changed it up a bit. Obviously, you're going to DPS the same way as I was talking about before. You're going to apply your little dots on the target, and you're going to start dropping the big necrotic strikes. Now, when it comes to Death Strike, the amount of healing you received is also important to the amount of damage you're taking. So the more damage you took within the last, I believe it's 5 seconds? Yeah, 5 seconds is also going to increase the amount that you're healed by for a minimum of 10% health on any Death Strike. So let's say you're fighting a Destro Warlock, and the Destro Warlock casts, let's say he gets a Chaos Bolt off. As soon as that Chaos Bolt hits you, that's when you want to drop a Death Strike. And then go about your normal rotation afterwards, and then wait for you to get hit by something big again, and Death Strike directly after. When it comes to dueling, this becomes very important, because if you're not doing this, you're only healing for the minimal amount that you could be healing for if you're getting hit by, let's say, 40k hits, 50k hits, something massive. That is going to highly affect how many Death Strikes or how much healing you're going to get for your Death Strike during combat. Now, when it comes to the ability Transfusion, what you're going to want to do is cap up your runic power to about 80. Now, Transfusion is going to reduce the cost of any Death Strike you're going to use on the target. So let's say you are just getting smashed on, your health is down to about 20%. You throw up Transfusion, and you could dump out an insane amount of Death Strikes in that small amount of time. Now, when it comes to Unholy, I believe you can get 5 off. When you're playing Frost, you can throw up Empowered Rune Weapon and get 6 off before the actual popping of Transfusion, which is kind of cool to see, but it's really not much of a game changer. Now, if you're wondering why I'm making an Unholy guide over a Frost DK guide, is the simple fact that you probably think that Frost is better now, but I can tell that the Blizzard developers, it's not their main. So, I mean, realistically, the reason why Frost isn't as good as Unholy in this new patch is the Death Strike change. And simply put, when we use runic power on our Death Strike, the fact that it does as much damage as Death Coil is the reason it's so much better. Because when it comes to Frost DKs, you're essentially trying to generate the majority of your burst with the set that increases your Frost Strike damage, which again is runic power. So if you're spending your runic power to reach maximum damage, you're not using your runic power to heal yourself. So essentially, this big amount of healing that we've gained in self-survivability comes with the price when playing a Frost DK. As an Unholy DK, there is no price. You're basically sacrificing absolutely nothing to grant you this large amount of healing, as compared to Frost DKs that lose the majority of their burst as soon as they start spending the runic power on that instead of Frost Strikes or instead of Breath. So just under that simple idea alone is the reason why Unholy DKs are going to be so much stronger than Frost DKs. So the last thing we're going to discuss is Azerite talents, because it is fairly important for Unholy DK to be rocking the correct Azerite talents to deal quite a bit of pressure or have really any chance of surviving on your own against another class. Now, as for the current Azerite talents I'm going to be using, it's going to be Cankerous Wounds, which increases the damage dealt by Festering Strike, which is going to lower someone's health down by quite a bit, and it's going to force them to heal, which of course directly after you're going to be smashing on those Necrotic Strikes to try and take away as much of that healing as possible. Now, obviously, the other thing that this does, it has a chance of applying 3 Festering Wounds instead of 2, which is really good for your overall rotation, because you can lay out 2 Festering Strikes, have 6 wounds on the target, and start dropping Necrotic Strikes for quite a lot of healing, taking away on the target. Now, I'm only rocking 2 of that. I would be rocking 3 if possible, but the other ability that I did find fairly well, or works well on Unholy DK, is Fester Might, which bursting the Festering Wound grants you 66 strength for 20 seconds. Stacking this effect does not extend its duration, so all it's going to do essentially is increase your main stat ability strength by quite a lot every time you burst on the target for 20 seconds, and then it resets. Fairly good for increasing your burst inside of PvP instances. I believe that strength scaling also is going to increase your Necrotic Strike damage, and of course the damage of any of your abilities and or dots that you're going to be putting on the target. target fairly well. Now, what was going on in the PTR and Unholy DKs we're using on there was Magus, which is a new Azerite trait that essentially causes Apocalypse to proc up on the target and cast Frostbolts, and as long as you were rocking 3 traits of that, those Frostbolts would hit for like 12 to 13k, which is fairly strong, especially considering the amount of health pool that we have right now. So that was the way we were going, but of course this morning there was a patch update soon after the 8.1 drop, and that was nerfed by 50% damage, 50%. So that 12 to 13k Frostbolt is going to hit for like 6.5k, which really isn't that much damage coming out, and is really going to be lacking in comparison to other talents, in my opinion. Kind of like Festering Strike here, that increases by 2,600. You have 2 of those. I mean, once we're able to actually get the higher eye level Azerite trait, that's probably going to do quite a bit more than the Magus will in terms of single target pressure. Now obviously the Magus is really good just for the simple fact that it lasts 20 seconds and it hits the target over time, so you can actually deal pressure to a target while you're dropping necrotic strikes on the target to increase your single target DPS, which overall increases your mechanical strength. But is that still going to be good? That's hard to say. I'm gonna have to jump on the PTR and test that out, and I'll go ahead and let you guys know about that in the future. But that really sums it up for, I'd say, this Unholy DK guide video. Very simple, very straightforward. You guys have been requesting that I do a simple update for this so you guys can live lord it up on this Unholy DK. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Let me know down in the comments below if you have any questions. Leave a like, and of course, until next time, this was your boy Hazzed.